of Ukrainians arrive in Eastern Europe fleeing the Russian invasion. The European Union's announced that it's going to take in Ukrainian refugees without asking them to apply for asylum first. The open door style policy will be there for up to 3 years. Radek Sikorski is a Polish MEP, also chair of the European Parliament's Committee on US Relations, and is a former defence minister and foreign minister of Poland. Radek Sikorski, welcome to the programme.
Hi, and Deputy Chairman of the EU-UK Friendship Group.
And a friend of the UK, as you usefully remind us. Then let me, Radek, put this to you. We've heard from the Polish government with a very open policy to Ukrainian refugees in this country, in the UK, a country you know well. You're a friend of this country. You're a friend of prime ministers. You were at university with David Cameron, who was a contemporary at Oxford with Boris Johnson. I think you were at Eton, weren't you, Radek? So as a friend of this country,
I wasn't at Eton, but I was a refugee in Britain, and I'm grateful to this day.
Oh, right. Okay. I over-egged your CV there just a little bit, but I know how friendly you are to this country. So in the light of the Polish response to refugees from Ukraine, what do you make of the British response? Since you mentioned your British affinity, are you happy with the way Britain's responding on the refugee policy?
I don't know the details of that, but I think Boris was courageous to have sent those troops to Poland, and his decision to send anti-tank weapons to Ukraine early on encouraged others. So it was very useful, and Britain used its advantage of speed in doing the right thing, and I think you have enhanced your reputation in the entire region of Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I wonder whether your view there, which is supportive and sympathetic, is going to be shared very widely across Europe, because the British response to the refugee issue now, which could become over time a crisis, it has been and will be criticised, won't it, as not going far enough?
Well, I mean, the only real deliverable of Brexit is that you have brought the EU citizens down to the level of everybody else in terms of rights of access. But, we will take any number of Ukrainians in Poland. I think other countries will also do that. We already have 1 million Ukrainians. We speak a similar language. We were the same country for 400 years. I don't think that's going to be a problem. And this is Britain's value added. Britain's value added was early on when you sent those the Swedish-made anti-tank weapons.
All right. Now, the reporting just a moment ago, the Ukrainian leader has signed the request to join the European Union. It looks from here, from where I'm sitting, talking to colleagues and experts on the programme, like a pretty distant prospect. What, as an active member of the European Parliament, watches this very closely, what do you think of that application to join the European Union? Where does it sit on the scale of probabilities and priorities?
Well, listening to Boris in the House of Commons, I wish we had him on the European Council arguing for some of the stronger sanctions and sensible policies. But sure, it'll take time. But look, a world in which Poland is a member of the EU, and now Ukraine will possibly be a candidate member, and Britain is not. If you told me that in the 1980s, when I was a refugee in Britain, I would not have believed you.
Yes.
No, of course, this will take years. Ukraine is in the process of implementing the association agreement, which I closed during the Polish presidency of the EU. It's implemented the majority of the association agreement, which means acquis communautaire, which means that its laws will be compatible with the EU in the area of the single market. But of course, to become a member, you have to negotiate dozens of so-called chapters. It takes years. It's much harder to join the EU than it was in the 70s when you joined. In the 70s, you joined first, and then you had time to implement. Now it's the other way around. Yeah. And I don't think there's a way around it now, because the EU is much more integrated, as you know.
Yeah.
But we should encourage the Ukrainians in that direction.
Yes, yes. Now, look, the Ukrainian story is playing out in real time as we speak. However that develops, we are now in and heading deeper into a new Cold War with Russia, an East-West confrontation of a kind that we haven't seen since way before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that involves, on all that we've heard, a stiffening of resolve between and among and collectively of NATO members, including Poland. Do you want to see your country a site now for a much stronger presence in terms of armaments, missiles, NATO missiles, and the forces of NATO?
Well, of course, it would be much cheaper for everyone to resolve this conflict by removing Mr. Putin from the picture and democratizing Russia.
Yeah, well, that's quite a difficult mission.
And I agree. I think we've all seen that we have an unhinged imperialist in charge of Russia, and that means the peace dividend is over because the peace is over, and that means we need to pay attention to our defenses. Poland will be on the front line, but I don't think it can be only Poland defending the rest of Europe. We need solidarity of EU and NATO members.
Yes.
And this will probably mean an arms race with Russia. Terrible for Russia, but we'll have to do it. Let's remember how the Soviet Union collapsed. It collapsed because they bankrupted their economy by devoting too large a proportion of resources to defense. And of course, the Russian economy is much weaker than the Soviet Union's. It's the size of Italy. So if they take on the entire West again, they will lose again because we have an 18-1 advantage over Russia. This is the Putin's madness. We now have moral clarity about who started this.
All right, I'll leave it there. Radek Sikorski, Polish MEP and former Defence and Foreign Minister of Poland, thank you so much for joining us. The time now is 5:27.
The World at 5 with John Paynar on Times Radio.
Time for a roundup of news around the world. More than 500,000 people have fled their homes to escape the war in Ukraine, the UN says, as heavy fighting continues across the country. Major cities, including Kyiv, Kharkiv and Chernihiv, remain under attack from Russian forces. A Ukrainian sailor has admitted trying to sink a yacht owned by the head of a Russian state arms firm in retaliation for the invasion of Ukraine. The Lady Anastasia, which belongs to Russo-Boronexport Director General Alexander Mikheyev, was docked in Mallorca in Spain when the mechanic opened valves in its engine room. The death toll from huge floods across eastern Australia has risen to at least 9, with more missing amid a desperate rescue mission for 400 people trapped in the New South Wales city of Lismore. Rescue service craft, privately owned boats and jet skis were fanning out over the submerged city, which is 450 miles north of Sydney, plucking scores of people from rooftops and trying to identify others still trapped inside roof cavities. Donald Trump confirmed his grip on the Republican Party with a speech to conservatives over the weekend.
The Russian attack on Ukraine is appalling. It's an outrage and an atrocity that should never have been allowed to occur. It never would have occurred. As everyone understands, this horrific disaster would never have happened if our election was not rigged and if I was the president. Under Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under Biden, Russia invaded Ukraine. I stand as the only president of the 21st century on whose watch Russia did not invade another country.
The former president, who addressed the Conservative Political Action Conference in Florida, emerged as a clear leader in a straw poll of delegates with 59% of the vote. And Colorado is to become the first US state to accept cryptocurrency from private citizens as payment for taxes. Jared Polis, the governor, who has long been a supporter of alternatives to cash, said the state would take digital payments and deposit the equivalent value in dollars into its treasury.
The World at 5 with John Paynar on Times Radio.
Every day at 5, the Times publishes its World at 5, a story from beyond these shores, told by one of the Times' foreign correspondents. Today we can talk to Oliver Moody, the Times Berlin correspondent. Oliver, good afternoon to you. Do tell us what you've been writing.
Good afternoon. I've been keeping an eye on the situation with the millions of Ukrainians who are expected to be displaced from their homes by the fighting, and the more than 500,000 who've already fled the country for its western neighbours.
And what are your thoughts on that? There's a very steady flow now. It could become something of a flood. There's a willingness, isn't there, on the part of EU neighbours to take in large numbers. But how do you read this developing?
Probably the most striking development we've seen today has been Janez Lenarčič, the European Union's crisis management commissioner, saying he expects that more than 7 million people will be forced to leave their homes in Ukraine by the invasion. That would be, he described it as the largest humanitarian crisis in Europe in many, many years. Crucially, it would absolutely dwarf the scale of the 2015, 2016 migration crisis. And really, if you're looking for a parallel in European history, you have to go back to the immediate aftermath of the Second World War for something on this scale.
There will then, on that analysis, have to be a very large and very well coordinated response from EU members, among others, and pressure, I suppose, in lots of directions for countries to take a significant number of new arrivals, including, although not a member of the European Union, one presumes, Britain.
That's quite right. I mean, so one way of illustrating this is the country that's likely to take the largest number is Poland, where the Interior Ministry has said it's expecting up to 1.5 million. That would be the equivalent of a city very nearly the size of Warsaw. Crucially, the neighbouring countries have all said that they are more than willing to take in Ukrainians, and that's another very big difference to the situation in 2015. Even countries like Hungary have said that they're only too happy to help, and there's been an absolutely extraordinary humanitarian effort mobilized with thousands of tons of aid donated, thousands of Polish people queuing up outside football stadiums to give blood. The sense of solidarity and the sense that this is something on Europe's immediate doorstep is really not something I've seen before in my lifetime.
Oliver, can I just get your reflections on the historic shift in thinking that we've seen over recent days, very recent days in Germany, in its stance towards Russia, where the coalition, all parts of the coalition, Green, SPD, Liberal, coming together to take a much more forthright position with spending on defence, support for Ukraine, quite at odds to thinking in Germany over recent, not just years, but decades.
That's quite right. I mean, it's nothing short of revolutionary. And in the space of about a week, a level of leadership has become politically possible in Germany that simply wouldn't have been even 7 days ago, and certainly hasn't been for much of the past 2 decades. Only overnight, we've seen it announced that the Green Energy and Climate and Business Minister is looking into the possibility of extending the lifespan of Germany's 3 remaining nuclear reactors in the most anti-atomic energy country on the continent. So the sense of, I think above all, betrayal, given that Germany had invested so much political capital in trying to find some kind of diplomatic solution with Russia, has really galvanized mainstream politics in Germany into several decades worth of change in the space of about 5 or 6 days.
Absolutely fascinating. Oliver, as usual, thank you for coming on the programme. Oliver Moody there, the Times Berlin correspondent. Now, coming up, we're going to be discussing should the state-funded Russia Today have its licence revoked from broadcasting in the UK. I'm going to be talking about that with our media editor at the Times, Jake Cantor. And Hugo Rifkind is joining us to talk about his latest column in the Times right now here on Drive at 5:34. Just a little late. Let's get the headlines with Nick Ellaby.